Erik Ten Hag stays, but what happens next? Is this a marriage of convenience? Are Sir Jim, Eric and Dave all happily cuddling under the duvet? Or is Sir Jim really thinking about Gareth Southgate and pining for a long-lost love? Let's talk about what happens next now. Erik Ten Hag has been confirmed as Manchester United manager for the immediate future. So the first thing that's really essential to work out is how this new partnership is going to work. And it is a new partnership. Although Erik Ten Hag has been in charge for 2 years, this is the first Ineos appointed, although he's not actually left the job, but this is Ineos saying, you are our man, we want you to continue and to lead Manchester United. And so this contract will likely reflect the kind of the change in strategic thinking from the old regime under Arnold and Murta into the new regime. It's still very complicated, I think, because Dan Ashworth isn't in charge yet. Jason Wilcox has only just started. Omar Barada doesn't officially start until July the 13th. So how the kind of the vision and the mission for Erik Ten Hag and Manchester United moving forward is kind of reflected in the contract is not clear to me. But what is clear is that Ineos want Ten Hag to move away from a more traditional manager role to a really kind of a head coach role. And in some ways that could be seen as a demotion because you're not in charge of as many things as you used to be in charge of. And in particular, transfers, where Erik Ten Hag clearly has had a big say, Ineos do not want that anymore because they do not want this to be this kind of like Frankenstein squad that when a manager leaves, a new manager's having to kind of completely change things. They want continuity in the vision and continuity in the kind of the types of player profiles that they're going for. So that's going to be huge because Ten Hag, I think, is actually in a fairly strong negotiating position now. Ineos have kind of said, we're going to back you. This has come out publicly. So Ineos really need an agreement. And I think Ten Hag also clearly will want one too. But these kind of clearly these challenges around who's in control of transfers, the veto power, is going to come up. And it's going to take goodwill and compromise potentially from both sides, but I don't think Ineos can compromise too much. If they have a clear vision of how they want to run this club, Ten Hag has to sit within that. If not, it looks very, very weak on Ineos, and they're already compromising on how they want to run the football club with the guy that they've just decided to keep in power. So it seems messy. And then outside of transfers, there's also issues around kind of assistant manager. Do Ineos want to bring in their own man in the management team that can kind of be there to make sure that that vision of the playing style that they're looking for is implemented? It seems that Ten Hag has already compromised on playing style, but it came really, really late on into the season, really when things got dire after the Palace win. So I think this kind of this playing style, this vision, what it looks like, what Ineos football looks like, it's all very unclear. But do Ineos want to have somebody actually within the coaching staff who they feel they can trust? And should there be a manager change further down the line, that person potentially stays there to ensure that kind of that continuity? I think the last thing to say on the contract is goals. What are the goals for Ten Hag? What is the minimum requirement that he needs to achieve to keep his job, or to be seen as being successful in his job? Now, that isn't always actually reflected in a contract, but I think there will be stipulations within that contract for the consequences of not meeting the minimum requirements. For example, it could be that Champions League is seen as absolutely paramount, and if Manchester United don't get into the Champions League next season, then he can be let go for smaller compensation than perhaps for other under circumstances. So these things will need to be ironed out. But for what I've discussed, it's actually a lot of change, and there's a lot of change that Ineos want to give to Ten Hag. So what are Ineos giving back to Ten Hag? Because this is still a partnership. I don't think they're going to get everything that they want, especially as I said, I think Ineos are in a fairly weak negotiating position just because they're kind of married to Ten Hag now, and they really need this to work, given they've decided after this review to back him. And so it would look preposterous really for them to turn around and let him go. So there maybe have to be compromise. Maybe it's just a bit more money, and then maybe that makes Ten Hag happier. But I think it's really, really important and integral that they get this contract right, and it sets the right precedent for how Ineos want to run this football club moving forward, and that Ten Hag has to fit in that. But I do think that's complicated, and I do think that will take time. The next big one is obviously transfers. It seems that Ineos have been working on transfers, or should I say the football department has been working on transfers whilst this manager review has been ongoing. We heard today that United have agreed terms with Gerard Braithwaite, although Everton won an £18 million fee, which simply I don't think will be countenanced at United. So whether that actually can be a realistic deal to be done. So let's see what happens there. But clearly there needs to be alignment between Ineos and Ten Hag as to who the transfer targets are and the players that they're going after. And again, I think this does get a little bit messy given Ten Hag's input into transfers previously. But I think Ineos hopefully will be rightly saying to Ten Hag, look, a lot of the transfers that you have countenanced and you've been happy with haven't worked out. Antony, Casemiro, Mason Mount hasn't worked out, but perhaps we see a little bit more of him. Tyrone Malacia again this season hasn't been great, although I did think he had a decent first season. So there's only really been one success, and that's been Martinez. So I think kind of moving forward, how that relationship works between Ineos and Ten Hag and the transfer targets is absolutely vital. But it's clearly a key consideration and something that needs to be aligned now so that United can move forward with the targets that they've been looking at. I think the final thing to kind of focus on in the short term as well is really understanding A, why we had so many injuries and medical issues last season, and B, ensuring that that doesn't happen again, because it descended kind of into farce, and I think the areas of farce predominantly were over the kind of the recovery times, the operations, the Malacia botched operation, Martinez scan not being found out on the metatarsal injury, Casemiro complaining of muscle complaints that he's not necessarily had at Real Madrid before. Great piece on The Athletic to read about that. Not sponsored yet, but who knows, this viewership grows. I could be raking in the pennies from The Athletic. But I think these are really important points, and who is actually to blame, I think is really an open question. It certainly feels that Ten Hag or the training regime has to have some kind of culpability in the number of injuries that United had. But it feels like it's a very multifaceted problem, and there are probably people dropping the ball or making mistakes or things going wrong in a number of different areas, which led to what essentially was cataclysmic returns. Not having a left back for the majority, like for so many parts of the season, just unbelievable, astonishing, really. But this has to be addressed. This has to be very, very high up on Ineos's priority list, because if not, you're not giving them. The manager doesn't have the tools to do his job, and it doesn't matter what manager it is. You saw how Jurgen Klopp struggled when he didn't have any fit centre backs, and it was only 2 seasons ago. So it's absolutely vital that there is no persistent, continuing fitness issue that occurs next season. And if it means players need a bit more rest time, that they manage players carefully for the first few months of the season, I think that is a price well worth paying for the longer term benefit of the players and their fitness and of any kind of recoveries that they need to do. And that's all I got for you this time. Great to chat, and I will see you all on the next one. All right, adios. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.